Welcome to another session of the communication skills lecture. Now, today's session is titled Academic Writing Skills. In this session, we are going to look at various aspects of academic writing skills. We are going to look at the features of academic writing skills. We are going to have a look at the writing process. We are going to look at the different types of essays that we have that are pertinent to the academic to the academic life, and we shall see how then these combine to make you a better writer. We hope that by the end of this lecture, you'll have an idea, or a lot more idea than you have at the moment, on how to go about writing your essays and anything else that you need to write as a student in your academic life. Now we start then with the features of academic writing. What do you mean by feature? Feature simply means, what does it look like? What probably are its functions? And like I've said, what does it look like? How does it function? What are its, how do you go about writing an academic essay and any other types of academic writing? So number one feature of academic writer is that it has a clear structure. Now, by structure, we mean how it is developed, how it looks like, how it is formatted, for instance, so that you can then say that the structure provides a framework around which the writing is constructed, and it enables materials to be presented in a coherent and logical manner. It's just like in the structure of a house. There's a way in which what you call a house is structured, and if you don't have the frame for your house, then your house or your structure, whatever it is that you want to build or construct, will not stand. So similarly, with writing, it has a particular structure, a particular way in which it is represented, so that if you don't do that, then it will not stand. It will not really be academic writing. Secondly, another feature of academic writing is that it develops an idea. And what do you mean by this? There is when you're writing, you are just not writing for nothing. There's something that you want to communicate. There's an idea that you want to communicate, and there's a way of communicating this idea. So academic writing, therefore, has a clearly formulated central idea that is developed in a logical manner, leading to a conclusion. I'm sure when you have read all the academic stuff that you have read, essays by other people, maybe academic books, you'll find that there is a way in which ideas follow each other logically. There's a way in which the idea which is being developed is supported in a particular manner, in a logical manner that make you understand. It is not just haphazard. It is not the conclusion coming after, straight after the introduction. It is the introduction, the main part of the body, and the conclusion. And even within these sections, there's still an order. Things are still ordered clearly. It is another feature of academic writing is that it is analytic. What does analytic mean? It means that it acknowledges and deals with the complexity of the subject matter by explaining, giving reasons, examining or anticipating consequences, comparing, contrasting, evaluating issues. So academic writing has got these features. It analyzes a particular idea or a particular concept, and in this analysis is maybe either comparing or contrasting, is either evaluating something, or it is examining in a particular way, and this is what makes it academic versus, let's say, fiction writing. Fiction writing also might examine ideas, but not in the same way maybe as academic writing. uh, it is based on sources. The fourth feature is that it is based on sources. In other words, it builds on the works of others when reporting, developing, applying, criticizing, or even rejecting the contributions made by others. And it cites authorities, so that when you cite authority in your academic work, then it gives what is called credibility. People take you seriously. They know you have read. They know you understand the subject, and they know therefore what you are offering is not just from you don't not just pulled it from the air, but is something that you've actually read. You are well versed in the field. Now, notice that when you say that it's based on sources, it is not saying that, again, unlike fiction, these are ideas that you have just pulled from the top of your head. You are actually building on what others have already done. In other words, you have read other people's work and you have seen the work, and you either want to contribute, you agree with it, or maybe want to contribute, supporting it, or maybe you don't agree with it and you want to contribute, giving your reasons why you don't agree with it, etc. So it is work that already has been done. Academic works normally is work that has been done in others, and you are just giving it another aspect, another angle. So it's not anything new that you're just conjuring it up yourself for the first time. It is also explicit. Fifthly, it is explicit. Um, it explains what it intends to achieve, demonstrates, and defines key concepts. In other words, it is clear. Explicit means that it is clear, it is not ambiguous, so that when you are doing academic writing, you have already told your readers what it is that you want to achieve. In other words, why are you writing? What are your objectives? By the end of this piece of writing, what is it that the reader should be able to understand? It must be very clear and not ambiguous. It must not be open to any interpretation at all that anybody wants. In that way, you'll not have met the purpose of your writing, because you will not have actually clearly explained the idea to people, to the readers, the way you want it. And then another feature of academic writing is that it uses academic language. So again, this is what makes academic writing different, for instance, from fiction, just ordinary fiction. There is academic language, there is formal academic language that you must use. The language includes vocabulary, it includes sentence structure, how you structure your sentences, what vocabulary you use. You don't use slang and casual vocabulary in academic writing. Instead, you look for the more formal word, you look for the more formal way of structuring your sentences, how you punctuate them, etc. And even the voice, what is called voice, the voice of your academic writing is quite different from the, let's say, the voice of a novel that you are writing. So those, in a nutshell, are some of the features. They may not be all the features, but they are the salient features, the important features of academic writing. So we then move on to the writing process. You know, what is the writing process? What does it mean? As we've just said, that there's a way in which you organize that your academic writing. So the academic writing, as you have seen, is a process of discovering ideas or giving out ideas there, how you organize them, and how you develop them and how you organize them. So you discover ideas from the books, from any other sources that you read. Once you have discovered these ideas, you are going to develop them in a particular way, and finally you are going to organize them also in a particular way. So writing, therefore, goes through some certain stages, and the stages of writing are as follows. We have the stage that is called exploring and planning. Now, then we have the stage. Now, this stage entails discovering a topic. Now, by discovering here means that it's not anything that you didn't know before, and maybe like an explorer in the jungle of Africa, you're discovering something for the first time, but it means simply that you are delving into it, you are looking into it, and you want to understand what it is. Because most of the times, as a student, your academic writing is going to be essays that you have been given, tasks, essay writing tasks that you have been given by your lecturer, excuse me, that by your lecturer to hand in after 2 weeks or after 3 weeks. So the essay, of course, is a topic. Is an idea that your lecturer wants you to explore in a particular way. So when you are saying, therefore, that you are discovering a topic, it means that you are now reading about the topic, understanding what the topic entails, and understanding what it is that your lecturer wants you to produce. And once you have done this, of course, you must also find supporting ideas. Once you have understood the essays, then, well, if it's a comparison and a contrast, then you'll now have to find details that support, or details maybe that contrast. If it is discussion, or if you say, by examples, because normally you'll be asked maybe by using examples, then you have to now find out which are the detailing examples. So this is the process of exploring and uh, planning. We'll go into details a little later. Then the next stage after exploring and planning is what is called drafting. You will now have to put these details in a paper form, in write in a written form, because you have just been reading and finding out. And as you are reading, remember we have talked about note taking. So as you are reading and discovering and planning, you are actually taking down notes that are going to be the main points, notes that are going to be the details supporting your main points. And at this stage, most likely, they are in very haphazard manner, because you've just been reading quickly to find out if you understand what you're supposed to be writing about. So drafting, therefore, it means that in a very, very rough form, you are going to now, out of the points that you took from the various resources, reading resources, you are now going to try and come out with something written of your own. The very, very fast writing that you are doing. Of course, this is a very rough draft. Nothing is organized, nothing is ordered as yet, but the ideas are there. To move fast at this stage, you do not try to order things. You just simply try to write things down. So it's drafting, therefore, entails getting ideas and supporting details down on paper in a rough form. So that is the second, drafting. Now, drafting goes through several, as we shall see, it goes through several phases. For instance, then because you can have first draft, second draft, third draft, etc., until finally you have your final uh, fair draft that you want to hand in. So depending on your writing skills, you can have at most 3 drafts. If you're very thorough and you're a perfectionist, you'll probably have more, but definitely you'll have more than 1 draft, because 1 draft is very, very rough indeed. Then the third stage from drafting is called revising. Now you have drafted, you have had, let's say, your final draft, or what you consider a fairly good draft. Maybe from this draft, from this third draft, I can hand it in. But before I hand it in, I must just go through it to make sure that everything is just the way I want it. This can go for the essay that you're writing, or for any other important academic writing that you're doing. And revising entails rethinking and rewriting drafts to improve your content. So as you're revising, you are focusing on structure. The structure here means the formatting of the whole essay. Do I have the introduction in the right place? The body of the body of my writing, is everything in the right place? Are all the paragraphs there following each other logically? Are all the full stops and commas in the right place, etc.? Then finally, you have what is called editing and proofreading. And here now, this is where the commas, the correct grammar, the correct vocabulary, the all the mechanics come in. Now, so before we go into the very details of essay writing, we'll just talk about the different types. I'll just quickly mention the different types of essays that you have. Now, there are different types of essays. There are many different types of essays that you can write, and maybe you may not be able to write them all during your academic life, but in your let's say 4 5 years at the university, it'll be very strange if you didn't have to write all the, or if you didn't come across or interact with almost all the different types of essay writing. Now, the different types include what you call exposition. Now, an exposition is an essay that explains a theory or a plan. Again, we shall see, we shall go into this in a little bit more detail later. Then we have a description. A description describes, just like the term suggests, it is describing something, an idea, a physical something, and it gives the reader an impression of what is being talked about. We have also an essay type called argumentation. Now, argumentation entails reasoning methodically for or against a certain idea. So it aims by at proving a point by arguing. You argue your case. Again, the terminology gives a fairly good idea of what type of essay argumentation is. You have an idea you are convinced about. It may be wrong, it may be right, or wrong, but it is your idea and you believe that that's how it should be. So you want to write and argue about it. You get a lot of this, let's say, in newspaper editorials, for instance, where the editor wants to argue a certain point and he puts all the reasons why his point is the right point. Also, just other features. If you look at feature writing in newspapers, this is also fairly academic writing. So if you read, let's say, the dailies, you'll find feature sections where writers argue some particular point, some particular belief that they have, and they bring all the reasons to argue their point. And in some cases, the reader, or in most cases, by the way, the readers feel fairly convinced, and you can find the idea now moving on as the writer argued it. So it functions, therefore, to convince others of the correctness of a given view. So this is my view, it is the correct view, and this is my reason. I'm arguing for it. Then you have what is called narration. Now, narration is reporting of events in a given order, in a sequential order. You're narrating this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. You are simply narrating a particular event, a particular happening, a particular instance, etc. So, a narration therefore aims at giving the essay typically temporal dimension to the sequential order of events. In other words, it gives the times, it gives you what happened at what time. Now, it may not be exactly as the time orders, but it can go back and forth in a very clever way. This is why you have things like flashbacks, for instance. But in academic writing, narration normally is a very weak form of writing that you probably find not so much like, let's say, argumentation or exposition or description or explanation or even comparison, comparison and contrast. You are asked to compare certain ideas or certain happenings, certain phenomena. You are asked to compare in a way that is conclusive, and also in a way that is convincing. So again, as I've said, we shall come back to this as as we are planning, as we look at planning the essay. So we look at the essay in a little bit more details. So those what we've just been talking about are the general summary of what an essay is. But now, how do you plan to write an essay? Now we say that you discover you start by discovering the first was discovering your topic and planning your essay. So you as soon as you're given your essay topic, you analyze it, you look at it. What is it asking you to do? Is it asking you to analyze? Or is it asking you to describe? Is it asking you to explain? Is it asking you to argue, etc.? So then you need to understand the content of the topic. How do you understand the content? I've already discussed that. I've already said that you also look at um, the what you call the instructional instructional verbs. What are you being asked to do? Are you asked to argue, evaluate, etc.? And then, very, very importantly, you look at the content word to determine the subject matter you are expected to handle. For instance, the content words, we have content words and we have grammatical words. The content words are the words that have the meaning in them. The grammatical words are the words that join the content meaning to make a sentence, a statement, and therefore give meaning to a sentence or to a phrase or to whatever it is. So you look at the content the meaning of the content words in the essay topic. For example, if there's words like environmental problems, then you look, this will guide you. When you go to read, you start reading about environmental problems. You look, if the content word, you look at, there are words like literacy, you start going to read about literacy. If you look at words like gender and development, you start going to look at those, formal education, etc. So you look at those and you want to understand, what does this mean? Now you want a very important aspect of planning an essay is also gathering the. We have now understood your topic. You want to now start gathering information about uh, your topic. How do you start? Ask yourself, how do you normally start? I'm sure by now, as university students, you have probably written one or two essays or several essays. How did you start? Once you understood the topic, you have understood the title, what you have been given. How did you start to get information that is going to help you write a whole essay on this title? You begin by there are some techniques that you use to try and get information. One, the most important, of course, is reading and making notes. In our past lectures, we have discussed and discovered how to read and make notes. You have another way is discussing brainstorming. Brainstorming. How do you brainstorm? Normally, you brainstorm. The best brainstorming sessions ways are with sessions with friends, for instance. You remember, you have maybe your study group. So you sit together with your friends in your study group, and you tell each other, when we meet today at 5 o'clock, can everybody come with an idea of what this topic could mean? But you could also just brainstorm on your own without doing it with your friends in a study group. And one of the ways of brainstorming is just writing down ideas on a piece of paper without thinking, without even evaluating whether it is a good idea or a bad idea, whether it is going to be used eventually or not. Just brainstorm and put down the idea on a piece of paper. Um, then you have to go over all the information that you have collected from reading, from brainstorming, and you want to identify the key points. This is a key point, this is an important point, this is just examples. Even in the book, they said, for example. So this means that once, let's say, you are reading and you come across the phrase, for example, the statement, for example, it means that what has just preceded is a main idea. So you want to separate those from the details, the details which are normally examples. Now, once so you identify all the key points, this is a major idea that I need to develop further. This is a main idea that I need to develop further. We talked about this in the lecture on speech, on speech, on how to give speeches and how to give presentations. We talked about how to develop main ideas. It is exactly the same thing also in writing. So you think about what you call a sequence. What is the appropriate sequence for all this material that you have? Probably now you have a lot of material, not in any given order because you have been reading from different sources. But now at this point of planning, you want to look at all the material you have and decide where it is all going to go. So at this point, you draw what is called an outline. You do an outline. So in the outline, you have your main points. And under your main points in the outline, you include examples and details that are going to support your main points. All this is probably still in point form. Your outline probably or still is in point form, and the next stage therefore is now to try and put this all your ideas now in what is called continuous prose. Continuous prose is what you see, how essays are written, how books are written, not in point form, but just one point flowing into another smoothly and making sense. Now, um, what is your outline? How do you, what should your outline look like? Your outline now at this point, you now must have an introduction. What is going to go into your introduction? Um, in your introduction, you are going, the whole format. You have introduction, you have the body, and you have the conclusion. So, what goes into, let's say, introduction? In your introduction, you are going to tell everybody, you are going to say very clearly, very explicitly, what your whole essay is about. If the whole essay is looking at problems, the problems of climate change, in this essay, I'm going to discuss the problems of climate change in farming, in farming in Kenya, or farming in Nyanza region, or farming in central region, or farming at the coast. So already everybody reading it will know that they're going to read about climate change, and not just climate change, but the problems that come with come with climate change, and not just problems that come with climate change, but climate change in a particular region of the country, and not just in a particular region, but to a particular people, because climate change is not affecting only farmers, it is affecting also consumers, of other of the farmers' products. It's affecting very many aspects of the human life at the moment. So you have narrowed down to a particular area. This probably depends. Maybe you are given a very wide topic, discuss the problems of climate change. Maybe in your wisdom you decide that uh, this is too wide. You want to narrow it. So you narrow it down, like I've said, to particular people, I mean, part of the country, particular set of people. And this actually makes your writing much easier. Maybe you are lucky enough, the lecturer gave you all this. They gave you already a very narrowed down topic. So it's easy for you, therefore, to just go in and say and format your essay. So in your introduction, anyway, um, you you say what exactly that you are going to discuss. Then in the body of you give in the introduction, still in the body, you give a little bit of background on your there'll have to be a paragraph or two background on what you're discussing. So if it's climate change, for instance, or if it's environmental problems or climate, climate, then you'll have to talk a little bit about what has caused climate change. First of all, you have to explain what is climate change. What are the origins of climate change? You must tell people what you're talking about. You must tell people how the phenomena came about. You must then, within the main body here, say how then is it affecting people's lives? And then, still in the main body, in a different paragraph, in different paragraphs, you are going to say um, how is it affecting farmers, because we are talking about how climate change is affecting farmers in a particular area. Why is it affecting farmers? Why have we chosen that particular area to discuss? Or why, or maybe if it is a given essay, maybe the lecturer had discussed that particular area, there a particular reason, so you must include the particular reason. You must say, you must show why that particular place is important. So, that is what must be in the body of your or in the body of your essay. You must define, you must give, you must say what it is that you're talking about. You must say how is it, how is it a concern. You must say to who is it a concern, how a concern, and eventually you have to give what is called a conclusion. So the conclusion will depend on what you have um, written in the main body. If you've argued in the main body that this is a phenomenon that needs some kind of intervention, maybe the government therefore needs to do something to mitigate or to help the farmers out. Maybe because the rains are now not coming on the time expected, or they are too much, and they are flooding some areas now. Maybe something needs to be done. Dams need to be built to contain this water, so that at the right time now, water can be used to irrigate crops. Previously, maybe in July or August, there was a lot of rain and crops were it was possible. Or maybe government should now people should now be educated on the climate change and how it affects them, and they should be sensitized to the fact that they should now find solutions. They should now maybe study the environment, study the weather, just like maybe their forefathers studied the weather in those many years ago, and they realize that rains come at this time. So even you people now, you better now start studying the weather patterns to know when the rains are coming and what crops to grow, for instance. So in your conclusion, therefore, you may say that in let there needs to be education, sensitization, etc., etc. In at least you give something, an idea that can be worked on. Or you can summarize all you have said very in 2 3 sentences. You can summarize all you have said in the main body and say, as in this therefore means that this and this and this should be done. Now, how do you develop effective paragraphs? Now, in the first paragraph, we talked about saying in one sentence, in one very strong sentence, what your essay is about. Now, this sentence is called a thesis statement. So there must be a thesis. In the introduction, there must be a thesis statement. So how do we develop, let's say, the introductory paragraph, for instance? It should state the thesis statement. In other words, the purpose or intention of your essay. And it is this thesis statement that must be supported by anything else that you write in your essay. The paragraphs must support, each paragraph must refer back to the thesis statement. It must be supporting the thesis statement. Each sentence in the paragraph must be supporting the paragraph. The paragraph in turn is supporting the thesis statement. So this gives your essay what is called unity. It is all saying, talking about the same thing. It's giving the different aspects of the same thing. So, in other words, therefore, the thesis statement is the controlling sentence of the entire essay. The entire essay is controlled by the thesis statement. Now, this thesis statement can be at the beginning of your introductory paragraph, can be in the middle, it can be at the end of of your thesis statement. Normally, most people, when when you start your writing career, you find it easier to have your thesis statement in as maybe the first sentence, because we are going to write about this. because then you give one or two, your reason in one or two following sentences. Or if you are a good writer, you can start by giving a background to your thesis statement. His life has become very difficult for Kenyans at the moment. It is there's no food security, there's not enough food. The little that is there is very, very expensive. Not much is coming out of the farms anymore. And this is because um, the farmers are no longer producing as much as they used to. And the reason they're not producing this as much as we used to is probably because of the different weather patterns. Farmers have not studied enough the weather patterns enough to help them produce as much food as they used to before. And therefore, this essay is going to look at the problems of climate change, etc., that kind of thing. That is what will go into your sentence. You give it a background, you give it a reason as to why, and then you must say why you are you are writing the essay that you are writing. So basically, that is what goes in the paragraph. There must be a very important thesis statement. If it's not there, then even you yourself, as you're writing, you keep forgetting what you're writing about, and therefore your essay becomes chaotic and not ordered and structured, as you say that essays should be. Now, that is the introduction. There's what you call the body of the paragraph, of the essay. Now, the essay will have several paragraphs, and maybe you want to write maybe 2 3 sides of a foolscap or of via A4, and 2 3 sides you are actually talking of about 12 paragraphs. So 12 paragraphs. This includes the introduction and the conclusion. So the remaining 8 or so paragraphs are actually the body of the essay. Now, as I've said, each paragraph attempts to advance or develop in more details the main idea. Um, just like we have a controlling sentence for the whole essay, also there's a controlling sentence for the paragraph. There's a sentence that is actually saying what the paragraphs is about. The farmers have suffered now for the last 6 years. That is a sentence that is telling your reader that you are going to read to talk about the suffering of the farmers. It is called a topic sentence. And in that paragraph, you shall introduce what it is that has caused the suffering of the farmers. In the next section, you might want to discuss the manner in which they have been suffering. In other words, each paragraph must have a sentence that is saying what it is about, and this one is called a topic sentence. So please distinguish the topic sentence from the thesis statement. The thesis statement controls the whole essay. All the ideas must refer back to the thesis statement. The topic sentence controls the paragraph, and all the ideas in this paragraph must support the thesis statement. So, as you said, the body of the paragraph can be developed in different ways, again, depending on the type of essay that you're writing. If you're writing a description, a comparison and contrast, a narrative, exposition, etc., they could be in slightly different ways. So let's say you are writing a description. So if you're writing a description, for instance, then you'll express your idea or thoughts by appealing to the reader's senses. You are describing something the reader is not seeing. So you want the reader to touch this thing, to hear this thing, to smell this thing, to see this thing, and just to feel it. So you must therefore appeal to the senses, the physical senses, the senses of the reader, the sense of smell, the sense of, hearing, the taste, the touch. The moment you're saying about a fruit being bitter, you are actually um, appealing to the sense of touch. So not touch, sense of taste. So you must therefore provide therefore what is called sensory appeals. You must make when you are describing in your paragraphs must therefore make the reader um, see by giving the details of what these things maybe looks like. You must give appeal to the sense of, let's say, smell by describing the smell of this thing. It's a pungent smell, it's a sweet smell, it's a sweet aroma. Smells like roses, smells like ammonia, smells like urine. You compare it maybe with something that somebody, the reader, is familiar with. I don't know if any of you knows, I've ever come across the smell of vanilla. So if you're talking about the smell of vanilla, make sure that it's a very familiar smell to your to your readers, and they can understand. So you give what is called a vivid appeal. You give vivid details, descriptions about giving details that appeals to those sentences, so that by the time the person has read, they can envision the height, they can envision the width, they can envision maybe even the weight, of what you are discussing. That is very, very important. Then, of course, you must choose which of the attributes of what you are describing that uh, which are important for the reader to know. Is it important and to know the weight, to know the height, to know the size, or is it just important to describe the weight only? Um, is it also important to describe what it feels like, the texture, or is it just important to describe maybe the sound that it makes? So that is description. The important thing about description is that your paragraphs are broken down into these senses. The person is probably not with you, but they want to see what it is that you're talking about. So description gives a very good is a very good way of showing your reader, of telling your reader what it is that you're talking about. Now, a comparison, then we have the comparison contrast. Let's say you are writing a comparison and a contrast. Now, a comparison shows similarities between two or more. Um, so if you have two or more topics, then you want to show the similarities. Then you will compare them. There's also what you call contrast. The contrast will show the differences. Now, it is not always that you are asked, let's say in an essay, to compare and contrast. Sometimes you just ask to compare, but a lot of people, when they're asked to compare, they also go into the contrast because they are so used to the two going together, compare and contrast. So we go back to what I said earlier. Read the verb, the discussive verb, and is it asking to just compare, or is it asking you to just compare and contrast? So a paragraph, therefore, developed by comparison and contrast develops a topic by examining the similarities and differences between two or more topics. Now, in your outline, as you are understanding your topic, discovering your topic, you realize that you need to give similarities. So as you're reading, you're already noting down, maybe in point forms when you're drafting, drafting, you're already noting down in point form what the similarities are and what the differences are. So you have said to yourself, I have four differences, or I have two differences and two similarities. Therefore, I have 4 points. These are going to be four paragraphs. So in each paragraph, you give the first similarity, you give examples, or you give your reason why it is a similarity. The second person, the next similarity, and the third paragraph. However, there are contrasts. There are two contrasts. So as you write down the contrast, paragraph 4, you give the contrast and show why it is a contrast. Similarly, the next paragraph, and so on. So notice as you're writing, you also must tell your reader what you're doing. It is always good to point out. It is called signaling in text. When you're writing, you signal. There are actually two similarities and five differences between the two. So already your reader is expecting to read about two similarities and five differences. This is a good way of carrying your reader along with you. Because remember, if it is even your lecturer, the more successfully you carry your lecture along, the more marks you'll gain. If you are not telling him what to do and he has to go back and forth to look for what you are doing, you can be quite sure that is where he may miss some point, and you not earn a very good grade because you did not signal. So always signal what you're doing in text. Also, comparison also emphasizes the similarities while contrast emphasizes differences. So a writer chooses to develop a paragraph on contrast when the intention is to help the reader see what is being described, or what as being in common, and what is being described as the differences. Now here you can also hear the word description again in the comparison and contrast. Now, this means that, as I hope, as you have seen, that even within a particular type of essay, it can go hand in hand with another one. So that comparison, you find that description is actually incorporated in comparison, because you cannot compare and contrast if you do not describe. Maybe they smell differently. Maybe they're different colors. Maybe they sound differently. Maybe they're different heights. So you must describe this. They're different heights. While he's short and stout, another one is tall and thin. So you are appealing to the senses in the comparison and in the comparison and contrast. So the point I'm trying to put across is that the different narratives, the different essay types are not absolute. They are not compartmentalized. They actually flow into each other. You have description inside comparison, and contrast. So to achieve, therefore, the comparison, let's say, and contrast that we are looking at in the comparison and contrast essay, the writer uses words that signal these differences. So if you want to show comparison, there are some special words that you need to use to show that these things are similar. So words like alike, similarly, in the same way, in a similar way. These are words that you must use to show people that what you are showing is what you are showing here is actually similarities. There are also words that um, show contrast. They imply contrast. On the contrary, on the other hand, even the word difference itself, the difference between this and that, um, these and other words like them show contrast, and it is good. And I'm advising you to, if you find yourself having to write this kind of essay, please use these words to signal very clearly what it is that you're doing. So that is, in a nutshell, how to develop a comparison and contrast paragraph. How do you develop an exposition? If you remember what you said, an exposition is, remember at the beginning we said that there's a type of paragraph called exposition, and this one actually explains, maybe a theory, maybe an idea, maybe a phenomenon. So how do you do this? So a paragraph on exposition, seeks to explain, it seeks to inform, it seeks to expose, just like the terminology says, to expose, to show out clearly, what it is that is going on there. So the aim in an exposition, therefore, is to explain a process, how it works, or a phenomenon, what it is. So you want to therefore incorporate as much information as possible in how something works or in how something is. And again, this can involve comparison and contrast, or just contrast. Again, this can actually involve describing a process. So maybe in one paragraph, you could be comparing and contrasting. In another paragraph of an exposition, you could be describing, how this process works, or how this process goes, or how this phenomenon um, works, or goes. So you find yourself therefore in an exposition describing a process to enable the leader to actually follow instructions, or follow the idea to understand in a step-by-step manner. So expositions normally are step by step. Each paragraph of an exposition is showing or is giving how this thing works. Now, I don't know if I said, when at the stage of outlining, you'll actually find that the main ideas are going to form your main paragraphs. So each main idea has forms a paragraph, and here is where you're going to explain the step-by-step process. Is where you're going to give your examples. Here is where you are going to give your differences and similarities, etc. So that is for exposition. Then we talked about, I said there's also another type called narration. And narration tells a coherent story. In a narration, you are narrating. And this is what you're all very familiar with all the time. We say what happened. We explain what happened in a step-by-step manner. It's actually a story. It is a story that tells about a series of events. So this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happens. This makes up a story. These events, little events that you're saying, in the end, make up a story. In fact, when you're reading fiction, a lot of the time, fiction is actually a narrative, is a narration, because it starts with an idea at the beginning and gives you small little events until finally these events are the story. They form the story. So narration usually has characters, normally have a specific setting, and then it have what is called a conflict and a resolution. What makes you enjoy a novel, for instance, is because at the beginning there is a problem. Something is happening, and you want to know how it all ended up. This person who was in danger, who had been kidnapped, did were they rescued in the end, or were they kidnapped forever? So there's a conflict. This is A narrator will always cause a conflict, something that makes it interesting for the reader to want to read to the end. And in the end, there's a resolution. Now, the resolution might be positive or negative. If they were kidnapped, were they found? They could either have been found or not been found, or they could have been found alive and well, and that's the one that you all want, alive and well. But also, they could have been found dead. That is still a resolution. So a resolution can be either positive or negative, depending on the writer's interest, on the point that he wants to put across to the reader. So again, a narrative paragraph has a definite beginning when things started happening, how things went, and how things ended. So it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So therefore, and also in a narration, there's one what you call a chronological presentation of events. Normally, it is most writers will just use it from the beginning. It started like this, then it went on like this, then it went on like this, and then it ended like this. But sometimes in a narrative, there's what you call things are not so chronological. You start with the end. You are seeing narrations that have, the writer has started with the end, working their way to the beginning, what you call flashbacks. These are very interesting, difficult to write, but like I've said, very interesting. So in a paragraph, therefore, developed by narration, the writer or the reader tells what happened. So if you're, let's say, planning and drafting a narrative paragraph, then your main points will be the events, the different events that happen, the small little events that happened. This will be the main points that you put in point form first in the outline, and then later on you now look at your outline. Okay, point number 3 was the point at which they were they were kidnapping this person. Maybe the point at which they went into this shop and they were coming out. So you create a narrative around the movements of the person who's going to be kidnapped. And then you create a narrative around how they've actually been taken. Their eyes have been covered, their hands have been tied with ropes, they've been thrown into a car, and you create a narrative around that, where they are taken. Then you create a narrative around how now there's blackmail money, things like that. Um, then we have analogy. Analogy, I'm sure you've all come across this idea, this word. So in the analogy, the writer, instead of explaining the idea directly in a paragraph or an example, he may use an analogy. So an analogy here is a simple situation that is similar to the main idea of the paragraph. In a story, Analogy, people normally, analogy, they come up in little stories. Preachers love analogies. They start by giving a little story that illustrates their main point. And you know, you've all done it, I'm sure. Lecturers have done it, preachers have done it, and other speakers or other events. When you are doing, when you are having, when you are, I was giving the lecture on presentations, I talked about analogy, I believe, and I explained what it is there. So a writer may choose to use an analogy to explain one object or the process that they think that the reader is more familiar with. So the main aim, therefore, of the writer using or developing a paragraph using an analogy is to help the reader easily get the idea, understand the idea, grasp the main idea because of the familiarity of the analogy. You use, you know, an analogy, you'll use events and maybe features which the reader is familiar with. And once they get this, then they understand what the writing is about. We also have definitions. If you're defining, then you're clarifying the meaning of a word or a term used. You're you are actually going into what is called well, definition. So if you're trying to, if you're asked to define something as a whole essay, you're, you know, you're beginning to think of how the one sentence of definition, you know is going to create a whole essay. Again, you know, definition here, you'll have to describe, if it is, if you've been given an essay, define the following. You're not going to use one sentence and say a rock is I don't know what is a rock, a hard substance from the ground. Geographers will not probably give us a one sentence definition of a rock. But because this is now a whole essay, you have to go into other features of a rock. You may need to compare and contrast. You may need to describe. You may need to explain. So, as you are reading, then you look at the features of a rock and you put that as a main point. You look at how maybe rocks are formed. That is now you go into definition. And any other interesting features, the different types of rocks, that will now go into your definition of what a rock is. So you look at the different types, you look at, you know, the hardness of a rock, you look at where they are found, you look at, you know, all the things you can find out about a rock. This will now go into your explain into a definition of a rock, and it is going to be form the different paragraphs. So you might find that the different types of rocks is one paragraph, how they are formed is another paragraph, where they are found is another paragraph, etc. Now, this of course will be probably a geography essay, and geographers will then know how what it is that rocks should feature. And of course, you may not know it offhand, all of it. Maybe you have forgotten your lecture. Maybe your lecturer told me, I'll just give you the outline, go and now read for yourselves. So you go to the library or you go to the internet or where it is. And then you will develop a whole essay on where you are just asked to define a rock. It's not one sentence, but it's now a whole essay of maybe 2 3 sides of of, of, of your A4. Okay, and then we look at cause and effect. How did you develop a cause and effect paragraph? Now, the cause and effect actually shows is a kind of writing that shows a relationship between two statements, one resulting in another. Again, the example that I gave about climate change and farmers, and farmers, the production or farming being affected, that is actually a cause and effect. Something has happened and it has caused another thing to happen, or this is the effect of this happening. So already I'd given, already I tried attempted to discuss the the paragraph about environment, climate change and farming. That is the cause and effect. And I've already described how you can develop that kind of a paragraph. Argumentation, again, you look at all the reasons why you think this idea is the one that should work. The reasons might not all come from your head. You might have a rough idea, but you must read. Remember at the beginning we said that you must read. So read, read, and come with all the reasons. And each reason now is going to form a paragraph. You're going to develop a paragraph from each reason, because as you're doing your outlining, you are now putting it in point form, the main ideas in point form. So as you start writing your first draft, you pick each idea and you write down the idea and you give examples, you give your explanations, you give your descriptions. All that is how to develop a cause and effect. Exemplification, you can actually be asked to exemplify something, and you can write a whole essay of examples. So you give different aspects. You explain, or you identify. If you're asked to exemplify something, you identify the different aspects of that particular phenomenon, and you give examples of that particular phenomenon. Or if something happened, exemplify, why this happened. So each paragraph identifies a particular aspect of that event, phenomenon, as thing, or whatever, and each then is is developed to the full in a paragraph which forms the whole essay. Facts and opinions. You can be asked to give facts and opinions in an essay. And this is very easy. You take a fact, you give your opinion, and then you support your opinion using a fact, more or less like a imitation, but not quite. All right. That is the main body of the paragraph. How to develop the main body of the different types of paragraphs. You have noticed that not all paragraphs are the same, not all essays are the same. The paragraphs are different. You must remember that in doing all this, you must give the main topic of the paragraph. In other words, there must be a topic sentence. And then after that, you develop in the way you have discussed, depending on the type of essay that you're writing. In the type, you'll find a descriptive paragraph in a comparison essay. You'll find a descriptive paragraph in a definition. You'll find a descriptive paragraph in argumentation, and vice versa. So be very flexible, and like I've said, don't think that these different types of narratives or these writing types are each is different, each is in its own compartment, and the twain shall not mix. The many mix very much, and the more they mix, actually, the more it shows your writing skill. So we have been talking about the main body. We have the concluding paragraph. Now, the concluding paragraph actually is a paragraph that brings together all that you have said. Hmm? It connects all that you have said. It summarizes the key points and might even restate the thesis statement. It's normally very brief. It just says, therefore, as has been exposed in the paragraph, this and this and this happened and led and this and this and this and led and this to this. And therefore, you restate the thesis statement if you like, and you conclude your paragraph. So, what are the features, therefore, of a well written paragraph? A well written paragraph should be a unified paragraph. Remember, I talked about paragraph unity um, earlier on. Now, paragraph unity means that all the ideas, all the sentences, all the ideas in all the sentences in that paragraph support the main idea. They support the topic sentence. In other words, one idea leads to another um, in a very smooth way. Um, so your paragraph must have unity. Every sentence must be supporting the main sentence. It also must have what is called coherence. Your paragraph must be coherent. It must have coherence. What does coherence means? It means that all sentences should be logically connected to each other in the paragraph. So you then use sentence connectors. You have connectors that you connect sentence like are, but, or, although. On the other hand, similarly, all those words that show that this sentence is immediately following this one. Now, the sentences, of course, are ideas. Ideas are contained in these sentences. So this idea in this sentence follows this one, or exemplifies this one, or contrasts this one. You have to be coherent. You just don't write sentences that don't show that I think I'm in a class that don't show that the sentence that the ideas are together. And then your paragraphs must be fully developed. What I've been trying to do all along is trying to show you how to develop your paragraphs. In other words, you must have sufficient details to explain or expand the main point in the topic sentence. I told you, I've just shown you that even if you're asked to exemplify, even examples, even if you're asked, even definition, if you have to define something, you will find a way of writing a whole essay on just definition, just not one sentence. So there are different aspects. When you're asked to define, for instance, there are these different aspects of the phenomenon. You are then asked, therefore, to talk about all these different aspects, give examples, explain them further, describe them, compare them. You know, that is one way of developing your paragraph. So each idea you take, You find a way of using example, you find a way of explaining it, you find a way of describing it, you find a way of comparing it, you find a way of narrating it, depending on what you have been asked, depending on the topic, what you've been asked. So it is never difficult to to exemplify a point. People always think that the details of a main point is just to give examples. You can also describe it. You can define it. You can, many things we have that I've already told you about. And then a paragraph must be appropriately organized. It has to have a clear, detailed organization. So you start, do you want to describe which one is more appropriate first? Is it in this paragraph, when you want to, let's say, describe, you want to expand the paragraph through description. What aspects should you start by describing first? That will lead logically into the example, that will lead logically into maybe the contrast. If the example is the contrast or the comparison, how do you start in such a way that it naturally leads to the contrast, which will probably naturally lead to the next thing? If you want to, let's say, okay, you're exemplifying the main idea. Do you define it first? Then after the definition, then you give comparisons of of the different aspects, etc. So you look at the logical way, and not just the sentence in the paragraphs must be logically sequenced, but also the paragraphs themselves. You know, which one leads naturally into the other one, or which one comes before the other one, which one makes sense to come before the other one. That you must be very, very clear about that. You must appropriately organize, and the organization will come at the outline stage. Again, you don't start organizing when you are now writing your third or your second draft. You start organizing right at the outline stage. You start saying that at this outline, this is the main point, and then these ones below it are going to be expanding the points below it. And here I'm going to describe, here I'm going to whatever, here I'm going to whatever. So that when you're now writing the draft, you're putting into continuous prose, it is easy. It's now just speaking and adding the ands and adding the ors and adding the buts and adding those, etc. As I've said, you must have a topic sentence, and the topic sentence, of course, controls the paragraph, helps you not to wander from one thing to another aimlessly. And then in your writing, you need to do something that is called referencing. Referencing. You cannot write a whole academic essay without having reference. Those are not your ideas. And even if your ideas, you want to support them by, by introducing ideas by other people who probably have done the research, who are probably experts in that area, whose opinions in that area are respected, and their opinions, they have put them down in books or put them down in essays and papers. And so that if you quote, let's say if you're a historian and you quote, Bethel Lugot, that is very respectable, and somebody will take you seriously. If you are a linguist and you quote Chomsky, somebody will take you very seriously, because they know that, yes, this idea of yours, if it's supported by what Chomsky says, then this is a serious essay. You understand what you are doing. So you in referencing, therefore, you can do three things. You can quote, you can summarize, and you can also paraphrase. Now, when quoting entails short or long quotes. You can quote in not one in short quotes are not more than 3 lines, and they are incorporated into the paragraph. So you can, as evidenced by Chomsky, and then you just continue, put in quotation marks Chomsky's, what you have lifted from Chomsky. You just don't write it as if it's part of your sentence. You see, Chomsky says as follows, or Goethe in his book, the Nilots, makes the following point, and then you put quotation marks around the point, and it must not be more than 3 paragraphs, and then it can be, I'm sorry, not 3 paragraphs, 3 lines, and it is part of of that paragraph. Now, there are some examples there of how to quote. Now, longer quotes are more than 3 lines. If you want to quote a whole paragraph of somebody's work, then you indent it. In other words, you separate it from your own writing, so that if your own writing ends in one line, you start another line, showing, as Berthold Goethe in his book, um, The Nilots. Then you put in brackets the year of that book, and then you put a full colon, and the page from which you have lifted all that 4, 5, 6, 7 lines of words. Now, when you're doing this, when you're indenting the writer's quotations, then you do not use quotation marks. You just, actually, in most cases, you'd use italics. Use italics to do longer quotations that are indented. But after you have put the name, after you have put down the name of the person from whom you are quoting, immediately in brackets, put the year of that publication, not the name of the publication, but the year of the publication. 1973, and then followed by full colon and the page from which that quotation comes from, and then set the long quotation out in italics to clearly show that that is a long quotation. So there are verbs that are used to signal quotations: states, notes, argues, defines, describes, reports, observes, emphasizes, refutes, concludes, etc. And many others that you'll also pick up as you are doing your own reading. Please, when you're reading, just don't read without being very aware of the different styles of writing, of the different words, of the different vocabularies that are used in academic. Especially, each academic area also has some of its own terminologies, what you call technical vocabulary. So there's sometimes the kind of terminologies you'll find in, let's say, chemistry, are not the same that you'll find in physics or in biology or in geography. The different disciplines have their own terminologies, but also they are what you call the general terminologies of academic writing. And I've already told you that there are some vocabularies. You don't use casual words, you use the more formal word of a particular idea. And when you are also signaling, there are some special signaling terms that you'll use. There are words that you use every day, but now when it comes to writing, you have to make sure that you use them to signal to your reader what it is that you are saying. So in the same way, when you're quoting, you signal to your reader that these are not your own words. These are words from a different scholar, a different writer. So you use those kind of terminologies like defines, describes, notes, etc. So, briefly, then that is about quotation, how you quote in text. And then you can also incorporate other ideas, other scholars' ideas, other people's ideas into your writing through what is called summarizing. You can summarize somebody's ideas when you want it to use it to support a point, because you can also support a point through summarizing. You can support a point through quotation. So when you're summarizing, how do you do this? So, summarizing a brief statement in your own words of the main ideas in a passage that you are reading. Again, this was done a lot in leading reading comprehension exercises. You are asked to summarize such and such a paragraph in your own words. So you can summarize a main idea of somebody's else that you want to use to support your idea into in your own words. When you use words from the original, then of course you're quoting. So this is actually restating the author's ideas in your own words. And when you're summarizing, please focus only on the main points without including the supporting details such as facts, reason, examples. Don't use those when you're summarizing. Summarizing is simply use the main points. Now this is very useful, of course, if when you are doing your drafting. And also when you're using your topic sentence, when you're crafting or developing your topic sentence or your thesis statement, these are actually summaries maybe of an idea. Also, you have what is called paraphrasing. You can also incorporate paraphrases into your writing. Again, a paraphrase is somebody's main idea. You can take it the way it is, but again, use your own words. This is done a lot in the Bible. There are very many different versions of the Bibles, and they're paraphrases of each other. They're saying the same thing in different words. So you can say the same idea in different words. Now, it is different from a summary in that summary is a condensed or shortened version of the original, while a paraphrase is a complete restatement, including the main ideas, the supporting details, the reasons, the descriptions. That is a paraphrase. Summary, just the main ideas. Paraphrase everything in your own words. So paraphrases, therefore, in some cases, will be actually longer than the original. If you look at paraphrases, versions of documents like the Bible, you'll find that a paraphrased Bible is probably longer in pages than the original. If you look at maybe those of you who are Christians, for instance, if you look at the modern Bibles, NIV, oh, is it called NIV? Is far longer, far larger than, let's say, the King James Version, which is very brief. But because the language in the King James Version is old-fashioned, is Old English, a lot of people don't understand it. Not just the vocabulary, but even the structure, the way sentences are structured. So for us to understand it better, scholars have come to rewrite it in the modern language. And they have taken everything, all the examples, all the reasons, all the parables, everything. So it makes it much longer because our language now is different. Maybe what in the old version was just one word or one idea, and in these days it is three words. Okay. So looks like we may not have to have another string. So in paraphrasing, therefore, those are the three ways of incorporating other people's ideas into your writing. In other words, I'm saying it is very much allowed. It is very desirable. It is very scholarly to also incorporate other people's ideas into your writing to show that yes, you're a scholar, you read, you understand concepts, you can get this from that person and compare it from the other person and come up with a conclusion of your own to show that you can write it down properly. Now, in writing, when when you're finally finished to write your essay, then you must show your sources. Where did you get all these ideas, all these quotations? Where did you read? So if you, let's say, quote, now you must give the source. You must give the title of the book. You must give the year of publication. You must give where it was published, and who published it. So bibliography. So what is at the end? In your case, you give not a bibliography but a reference. The reference list where you refer to. So this is the list of all the material you used in writing your essay. It includes both published and unpublished documents, such as books, periodicals, seminar papers, academic journals, internet sources, and I'm sure these days we use internet sources a lot. It also includes all the sources cited in the text. And for your essays, actually, you will, in your reference, put only sources that you have cited in your text, or sources that or where you have paraphrased, for instance, or summarized. And then you list them at the end, at the end of your writing, in a separate page. Now you list all this in alphabetical order, so that Adam will come before Asari, and those two will come before Boniface, and Boniface will come before Clarence, etc. In other words, you do it in alphabetical order. And it should have such information as the author. You start with the author, and you just don't say Judith Miguda. You start by giving the author's surname first. Miguda J, then you put, after Miguda, you put a comma, J, full stop, A, full stop. Miguda J A. You don't put AJ Miguda, but Miguda J, Miguda comma, then J, full stop, then A. Normally you give the surname is in full. The other names are in what do you call them? Abbreviations. What do you call them? Not full anyway. Then after that, in brackets, you put the no, before the brackets, you put the title of the book or the title of the article. It's either book or article. So you put, if it's a book, then you put the title just normally. If you are typing, you just put in normal Roman, or normal type. If it is an article, then you put in italics. So if it's a book, I'll finish the book. So if it's a book, you put the title, and then you put author. Okay, fine. Let's start again. You start with the author, and then in brackets, you put the year of publication of the book, and then you put the title of the book, and then you put the place of publication of the book. Oxford University Press, comma, Oxford. That is how to put the title of a book. Now, if it is a title of a paper, then you'll put the title of the paper in italics, and then you write, then you put a full stop. And then you start a new sentence with in, then you put the name of the book or of the journal or of the book or journal or periodical from where this article came from. In I'm trying to think of a journal that could serve all of you, but since I'm a linguist, I may just put the title of a linguistics journal. So language and linguistics. Now, language and linguistics is the name of the journal. So the name of the journal you put in ordinary letters. It is the article from this journal that you put in italics, and then you put the place of publication. So in language and linguistics, you put the publisher, Oxford University Press, the place of publication, Oxford. There are some examples that you can see. Hoy Michael, H. The example is Hoy Michael. Hoy was actually my supervisor when I was a master's student. In 1991, Lexical Patterning, that is a book. You will know straight away that's a book because it is put in ordinary lettering, and then it was published in London. There's before you put the publisher, you put those two between you put the full colon between them. So there are variations also depending on the number of authors and the type of material. So you can have one author or two authors or three authors or even more. But if there are, let's say, more than three, then you use the word et al. Et al. Et al is et, al is al, and this et al is in italics. So you'll put probably Hoy M 1991, Coulthard M 9, you put Hoy M, Coulthard N, Anthony B. And the other six, you're not going to put all their names, you'll just put et al. And then you put the year of publication in brackets. And then you put the name of the book and the place of publication and the publisher. Now, we are also different types of referencings, but I think mainly in our institutions, in our country, in Kenya, we use what is the Harvard, which is what I've just told, what I've just tried to describe to you is the Harvard style of referencing. So just keep to that. So therefore, come to the end of the lecture on features of academic writing. Thank you very much for listening.